Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A decade ago, the Nationals began a campaign to end the Prime Minister's support for the climate change policy he staked his leadership on. Now it's reported that the Nationals have lost faith in the Prime Minister's ability to deliver his signature big business tax handout, the centrepiece of his economic plans. Will the Prime Minister tell the entire parliament, including the Nationals, that he won't give up on his core belief and signature tax policy to give $80 billion to big business?
Prime Minister has the call.
So, thank you, Mr Speaker. I assume the honourable member is referring to the government's enterprise tax plan, which involves reducing company tax to 25%. That, of course, was described by the member for McMahon as a Labor thing and a great objective. It was. And of course, it was described by the Leader of the Opposition himself as cutting company tax, he said, would increase investment, increase productivity, and result in more jobs and better paid jobs. And every Labor leader before him has supported reducing company tax because they know it delivers more jobs and greater investment. And, Mr Speaker, that's what we have been seeing. We have, in the last calendar year, the largest jobs growth in our history, and since the coalition was elected under the leadership of the member for Warringah in September 2013, 1,013,600 jobs created, over 1 million jobs. And so the Labor Party say that the government's economic plan is not delivering. It's delivering record jobs growth. I remember when Labor leaders, going right back to Neville Wran, great leaders in the Labor Party, used to stand up and say it was all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Not anymore. Just listen to him. What a clown, Mr Speaker. Seriously. What an embarrassing clown. Here we are with record jobs growth, and all he wants to do is catcall, Mr Speaker. He has got as much chance of getting away with his job-destroying, anti-business, anti-investment policies as he has in getting away with doctoring transcripts.
Members on my right, just before I call the member for Bonner, I'd like to inform the House that we have present this afternoon a parliamentary delegation from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, led by Prime Minister Dr. the Honourable Keith Rowley. On behalf of the House, I extend a very warm welcome to you. The member for Bonner.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister advise the House about how a stronger economy enables the government to provide tax relief for working Australians while guaranteeing essential services, including in my electorate of Bonner? Is the Prime Minister aware of any alternative approaches?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, member for his question. Mr Speaker, I thank the honourable member and his constituents in Bonner who provided the strongest support to the government's economic plan when we met them on my visit there last week, and they recognised that a stronger economy is delivering stronger revenues and enabling us to deliver and guarantee essential services. And they understood very keenly that a stronger economy is enabling us to increase funding to public hospitals in Queensland. Mr Speaker, over the next 5-year hospitals agreement, which is on the desk of the Queensland Premier waiting for her signature, an increase of 34%, $7.5 billion. Every year, more funding going into the hospital system in Queensland, just as it's going into Medicare, into the PBS, into all of the essential services that a stronger economy enables us to deliver. And, Mr Speaker, not only that, we've been able to pass through the House a personal income tax plan that will see hard-working Australian families keep more of the money they earn. And, Mr Speaker, it was good to see the Labor Party vote for it last night. It was. Mr Speaker, the Treasurer was so persuasive. He was so persuasive. He was, and he won them over. And I want to thank all of my colleagues who spoke in the debate, because they won over the Labor Party and they joined us. Of course, Mr Speaker, as the great mammalian himself, the member for FLYNN, would say, they are only human, and how could they resist the eloquence of the Treasurer? Mr Speaker, our tax relief is going to ensure at the end, when the plan is complete in 2024, that 94% of Australians do not pay more than 32.5 cents in the dollar in marginal tax, from $41,000 up to $200,000. That is an enormous reform. What it means is it removes the disincentive of people going into higher and higher tax brackets. And in response to the falsehoods we see from the Labor Party who say it's unfair, the fact is that those people who will be still in the 45-cent tax bracket over $200,000 will be paying a higher percentage of overall income tax than they are today, and a person on $200,000 who is earning roughly 5 times the income of someone on $41,000 will be paying nearly 13 times as much tax. It's fair, it's progressive, and it supports the enterprise of Australians that is delivering the record jobs growth our nation is seeing today.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A decade ago, the Prime Minister said he was not willing to lead a party that was not as committed to action on climate change as he was. So now, is the Prime Minister willing to lead a government that is not as committed to big business tax cuts as he is?
Prime Minister has to call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for Watson for his question. And I just remind him that he like the member for McMahon, who of course are studied imitators of the great Paul Keating, would know very well that old PJK, their master, their great mentor, he was the one who stood here, just like the Leader of the Opposition did in government, and said that cutting company tax delivers more investment, more jobs and better paid jobs, and underlined the need to be competitive. So, Mr Speaker, the only Labor leader that has abandoned that economic common sense in just another one of his numerous backflips that make Australians realise he cannot be trusted is the Leader of the Opposition, the member for Maribyrnong, the unbelievable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister needs to refer to members by their correct titles. Okay.
You've got to be clear. I'd say the only Leader of the Labor Party who has abandoned that commitment to lowering business tax to drive.
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. I think I've made my point. This started with the Treasurer, and I've had cause to read today the origin of it, but it's not coming in here. Okay, I'm making that very clear. Yes, no, I'd like the Prime Minister to withdraw.
I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
The member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer explain to the House why it is important to keep taxes under control, to support a stronger economy and provide tax relief to hard-working Australians, including in the electorate of Goldstein? And is the Treasurer aware of alternative approaches?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Goldstein for his question. First of all, he'll be pleased to know, like everyone else on this side of the House, that there is more than 1 million extra working Australians in this country since the Coalition came to government back in 2013. And those working Australians, over the next 4 years, will pay $954 billion in income tax. $954 billion in income tax, And over the next 10 years, working Australians in this country will pay more than $3,000 billion in income tax. So, Mr Speaker, I think it's the right time to have a tax plan that comes before this parliament, as was passed through this House yesterday, that provides $140 billion worth of tax relief to all working Australians, not just some, all working Australians, Mr Speaker. They're going to pay over $3,000 billion in tax, in personal taxes over the next decade, and we think it's entirely reasonable that we can bring a tax reform plan in here that deals with bracket creep, that deals with a simpler tax system. As the Prime Minister said, 94% of Australians paying no more than 32.5 cents as their marginal tax rate, dealing with immediate relief for low and middle income earners. That's what was put to the House last night. That's what was passed through this House last night. But before it was passed, what the Labor Party did was to strip away steps 2 and 3 of that plan and replace it with other measures. Now, the cost of what Labor put into the House last night and voted for was to turn a $140 billion tax relief plan into a tax plan $70 billion less. $70 billion less is the cost of the changes and the amendments that they put to that bill last night, Mr Speaker, to strip away steps 2 and 3. So they've taken a tax relief plan that is $140 billion and they've reduced it by $70 billion, Mr Speaker. That is what the Shadow Treasurer did in seeking to rip off working Australians last night. Every single one of them voted to cut that plan in half last night, Mr Speaker. And what it means is this. Over the next 10 years, we already know that the combined total of the oppressing tax burden is $220 billion, an oppressive tax burden of $220 billion. Well, last night they just jacked another $70 billion onto that, Mr Speaker. $290 billion. They wanted to turn a $140 billion tax plan into one which is just over $70 billion, Mr Speaker. And the shiftiness of it, to come into this place, say they're voting for it in the House and then say they're going to vote against it in the Senate. How can anyone believe a Labor Party that does one thing in this chamber and another thing in the other chamber, Mr Speaker? Well, unless, Mr Speaker, they want to change their tune, unless they want to tell Australians that they should get the full $140 billion.
The member for Jagga.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question's to the Prime Minister. What is the point of this Prime Minister and his government, given that his signature tax policy to give $80 billion to big business appears doomed? Is the Prime Minister's big business tax cut as doomed as his colleagues are claiming?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for the opportunity to respond to the members on the issue of taxation. Our side of the House, the government believes that lower, simpler, fairer, more competitive taxes is good for the economy. It's reward for effort. It actually grows the economy. That's what we believe, Mr Speaker. And as I said yesterday, when the member for Fenner, who gave us the benefit of his behavioural impacts on the tax treatment of mammals in his own references to these matters, Mr Speaker, I was mistaken to think that the Labor Party actually supported lower and fairer taxes, but I have found the reason for the apparent contradiction in the Labor Party's view on this issue, because it seems the member for Fenner is familiar with the work of Lord Layard. Now, this was brought to our attention by Ross Gittins back in April of 2005, who wrote a book, Happiness, Lessons from New Science. And drawing on studies of vervet monkeys, Mr Speaker, he concludes that we need to keep tax rates high to discourage people from working to make them happier. Eureka, the member for Fenner must have said. I've finally seen the light. Higher taxes is good for people, and they've decided to go down the path of having higher taxes, Mr Speaker. Well, I've got some advice to the member for Fenner. Stop listening to monkeys when you set tax policies, Mr Speaker.
Treasurer will resume his seat. The member for McMahon on a—
Mr Speaker,
no, hang on. I haven't called the member for McMahon, and I'm going to refer him. Has the Treasurer concluded his answer? The member for McMahon will resume his seat, and it is the the Greens question. The member for Melbourne.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. On Tuesday morning, Salim, a Rohingya refugee on Manus Island, died under your watch. By Tuesday afternoon, the government had leaked information to the press about this man and a negative story soon appeared. But by late Wednesday afternoon, you still hadn't notified his wife about his death, and when someone from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre called to comfort her, it turned out she was unaware of it. Minister, is it now government policy to leak to the media about the death of someone under your care and not notify next of kin? And doesn't this fundamental lack of human decency show that there's simply no line you won't cross?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Mr Speaker, I thank the member for his question. I'm not going to take a morals lecture from the Greens when it comes to border protection policy. The government has leaked information as claimed by the honourable member, and again, we can only look to his track record when he was in coalition with the Labor Party. The fact is, Mr Speaker, tragically 1,200 people drowned at sea when Labor and the Greens unwound John Howard's policies, and that was a tragedy. And in the current debate going on within the civil war in the Labor Party, it seems that they want to return tragically to those days. Mr Speaker, there were 8,000 children put into detention, and we have got those children out of detention. Under the plan, Mr Speaker, proposed by Labor and the Greens, there was no plan to take people off Madison.
The minister will resume his seat. The member for Melbourne, I'm trying to give the call, but it's a bit hard if he's on his feet already yelling. The member for Melbourne on a point of order.
Point of order is relevant. It is a very specific question and the minister can answer it.
The minister has the call. He's on the policy topic. I'm listening carefully. The minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'll make this point, and I've made it publicly before. I haven't put anyone on Manus Island. You did. You did. I am charged with getting those people
Members
off,
on my right,
and
the
I'm
member
doing
for Goldstein.
This government, not the government that you were in coalition with, the Rudd and the Gillard governments, this government has brokered a deal to get 1,200 people off Manus and Nauru, Mr Speaker. So, if you don't mind, I'm not going to take a morals lecture from you, because the fact is, Mr Speaker, you are responsible for more deaths than you realise. That's the reality for the Greens. They can come in and moralise all they want. I find it completely unacceptable, Mr Speaker, and I'd ask that the unparliamentary language that the member for Lilly has used be withdrawn, Mr Speaker. I find his comments highly offensive.
I'm struggling. Members on both sides, I'm struggling to hear what the member for Lilly was saying. I could certainly see him. Did the member for Lilly make an unparliamentary remark?
I did, and I withdraw.
The minister has the call. Minister's finished. The member for Swan.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House how the government's plan for a stronger economy is helping businesses across Australia, including in my electorate of Swan, to invest and create more jobs? Is the Treasurer aware of contrary schemes?
Good.
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Swan, who is a successful small businessman, particularly before he came into this place. Would want to congratulate all small businesses around the country for the role that they have played in ensuring, since the election of this government, more than 1 million Australians have found themselves getting into work. I mean, it's the ultimate 12-point turnaround, Mr Speaker, when you've got people going from on welfare and into work, and small businesses have been the absolute heroes of that story, Mr Speaker, in ensuring and we're getting Australians into work. Absolute heroes. And this government is backing those heroes in small businesses, in family businesses, Mr Speaker. We've been backing them with lower taxes. We've been backing them with simpler taxes. We've been backing them with stronger competition laws, with changes to Section 46, Mr Speaker, opposed by those opposite, I hasten to add, and as were the lower taxes, Mr Speaker. Increased incentives for small businesses to get out, start companies, invest, and we're seeing more and more of these businesses being created. Businesses of up to $50 million in turnover already 3.3 million of them, employing more than half of the labour force in this country, are already benefiting from our legislated enterprise tax plan, which is delivering them lower rates of tax. And there's 18,400 businesses in the member for Swan's electorate, 18,400 who are benefiting already from the enterprise tax plan that we've already had legislated through the parliament. And today I introduced legislation into the House to extend the instant asset write-off for a further year, which applies to businesses of up to 10 million, not 2 million, up to 10 million, Mr Speaker, to ensure that they can gain access to the instant asset write-off. Now, in the member for Swan's electorate, there's a company like many. This one's called Print Easy. It's a small business. It's run by Barry and Diana Mather. They're a business that have been using the instant asset write-off and are thrilled to know that they'll be able to use it for a further year to purchase equipment, to expand their business, and they see it for the incentive it is. But more than that, the instant asset write-off isn't just helping small business. It isn't just helping them to invest more in their businesses. What it is a clear sign from this government which says, we get it, we back you, we know that you're the strength of this economy, and we're in behind you every step of the way. Everything we can do as a government to support small and family businesses in this country, we are doing that. I'm asked about alternatives, and it's quite straightforward. At that dispatch box, 2 days after the budget, the Leader of the Opposition came in here and confirmed he was putting taxes up for all businesses over $2 million in turnover a year. He confirmed it. He goes on with his figures about $80 billion. He goes on about saying he'll reverse the enterprise tax plan, and that includes the legislated tax cuts for businesses that have already gone through the parliament, businesses between $2 and $50 million. The Leader of the Opposition is putting their taxes up if he ever gets the opportunity to put their hands in their pockets if he becomes Prime Minister.
The member for Grindler.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is addressed to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure. Is the Deputy Prime Minister considering abandoning his support for the government's $80 billion handout to big business so that he can actually allocate funds for the construction of the Western Sydney Rail project, which the government failed to fund in the budget?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the Shadow Minister for his question, Mr Speaker. And one thing I'll say about the Nationals is that when we say something, we put our names to it. And I get sick and tired. We put our names to it. And we're backing the tax plan of the government. We are. The Liberal and National Party, the Turnbull-McCormack government is backing the tax plan of the government. And I tell you why we're backing it, Mr Speaker. I tell you why we're backing it. Because it's a blueprint for our economic future. It's a 10-year enterprise tax plan, just like we've got a 10-year infrastructure investment pipeline. $75 billion. $75 billion investing in the infrastructure that this country needs, that Australians want, demand, expect and deserve. That's what we're doing. But I'll just go back to his little point about the newspaper article today, and I'll say again that at least when National Party members make a comment to the press, they put their name to it. Because I tell you what, we often hear shadow ministers, Labor source, left source, making comments about the leadership of the man opposite, leadership of the member for Maribyrnong. And you know why? Because he's on borrowed time. He's on borrowed time. And the member who asked the question knows it, because he's going to be the biggest beneficiary when the member for Maribyrnong falls over. He's going to be the biggest beneficiary.
Leader of the Opposition.
But I say again that the Nationals and the Liberals are in lockstep with the tax plan. Are in lockstep with... Oh, you've lost over. All right.
The member for Grindler on a point of order.
It is a point of order indeed, Mr Speaker, and I seek leave to table. I seek leave to table. I'm trying to help.
Member for Grindler will resume his seat.
I'm trying to help.
You're not helping me. Resume your seat. The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
tell you why the Nationals are in lockstep with the Liberal Party when it comes to the 10-year enterprise tax plan. But don't take my word for it. Let's talk about Barbara and Brian Carey, who run Warehouse Cafe in Bunbury, and the member for Forrest's electorate. She's right behind it because she knows that the tax reduction that she's going to get is going to help her business, just like the instant asset write-off. Rick Casagondre of the Hot Weld Engineering in Bunbury and the member for Forrest's electorate. There's a whole host of them. Warner's Fine Jewellery in Bundaberg in the member for Hinkler's electorate. They're all behind the 10-year enterprise tax plan. James McPherson, CPM Engineering in Gympie, in the member for Wide Bay's electorate, because they know that the 10-year enterprise tax plan is going to create more jobs. And when it comes to more jobs, there's no one better than doing it than the Liberal and Nationals 10-year enterprise tax plan we've achieved through the help of small and medium family enterprises and big business. 1 million jobs in less than 5 years. We said we'd do it in 5 years. We achieved it 5 months early, because that's what we do. We've got a plan. We're creating jobs. We're lowering taxes. All they stand opposite for is more taxes and less jobs.
The member for Petrie.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure and Transport. Will the Deputy Prime Minister please update the House on how the government is investing in nation-building, job-creating infrastructure in Queensland, including in my electorate of Petrie, and is the Deputy Prime Minister aware of any contrasting propositions?
Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for Petrie for his question and for his hard work in representing his electorate and for representing Queensland and for representing the best interests of the nation. He knows all too well how this government, the Liberal Nationals government, the Turnbull-McCormack government, indeed, a rousing cheer, how we're investing in infrastructure such as the Deception Bay Road interchange upgrade. And let me give you a few details.
Members on my left.
Even the member for Griffith's yelling, and she hasn't even got a voice, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, a $120 million Commonwealth commitment. This is the Deception Bay Road interchange upgrade. New 6-lane overpass. It increases safety. It reduces travel times. Less congestion. This is a congestion-busting budget. Championed by the member for Petrie. He's getting on with the job, just like all Liberal Nationals are doing. The Deception Bay project is part of a wider package of works on the Bruce Highway. On the Bruce Highway, where we've just committed funding to Section D. I know how much the member for Wide Bay, how much that means to him, moreover the people he represents, where our commitment is now up to $10 billion, an historic amount. Communities along the entire Bruce will benefit from our record $75 billion 10-year pipeline of investment, nation-building infrastructure, building our future, boosting productivity, creating local jobs, 50,000 direct and indirect jobs, including communities in Longman. Communities in Longman, where a substantial part of the more than $1.4 billion Pine River to Caloundra Road interchange upgrade will build a 60-kilometre corridor, most heavily trafficked section of the Bruce Highway. This funding is going to create hundreds of jobs in that particular region, improving travel times, flood immunity, road standards and, of course, safety. Mr Speaker, we've also committed to a rail development in Queensland, particularly the Beerburrum to Nambour rail upgrade to the north of Longman, set to benefit. I hear Team Queensland going, hear, hear. The members for Fisher and Fairfax, they're right behind that, as all Queenslanders should be, including the member for Griffith, who's lost a voice. Long call for, one by Team Queensland, one by LNP members, funded by the LNP government. This project will upgrade 40 kilometres of rail infrastructure, increase freight and passenger capacity on the North Coast line, reduce travel times and increase travel reliability. I'm asked, what are the alternatives? Well, it's a banana republic. It's the banana republic over there. Build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. That's right, the banana republic. That's what they stand for, higher taxes and less jobs.
Member for Griffith. The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last night, every member of his government voted against Labor's personal income tax plan. That will give more than 10 million Australians almost double the tax cut they'll get from the government next year. Why did the Prime Minister vote against lower taxes for 10 million Australians or a tax cut of up to $928 a year? Why didn't this Prime Minister vote for lower taxes for 10 million Australian workers instead of giving an $80 billion big business tax giveaway?
Members on my right will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House. Leader of the House. The Prime Minister has the call.
The Leader of the Opposition has really lost the plot. last night the House debated and voted on the government's personal income tax legislation. That's what was voted on, and that's what's heading up to the Senate now. And you know what, Mr Speaker? The Labor Party voted with us as well, and we want to thank them. Thank them for that support. They had the opportunity to vote against it, but they chose not to. They voted with it. So what are we to believe? What are we to believe? They're decrying the government's personal income tax reform now, which is going to encourage investment, it's going to encourage aspiration and work and enterprise. It's going to achieve an enormous reform to our personal income tax system. It's going to make it fairer, simpler, and it's going to be as progressive as it is today in terms of those on the highest incomes paying the highest share. So it's a very good reform, and we were pleased to see that the Treasurer and my colleagues were able to persuade the Labor Party to vote with it. But it seems that their enthusiasm was short-lived. They went home, went to bed, and they've turned up here today, and now they've got regrets. Well, it's too late. I say to the Leader of the Opposition, it's been passed through the House. And, Mr Speaker, the reality is you cannot rewrite the history of last night's debate. It's not like a transcript from the member for Barton. It isn't. It isn't. They can't get in and edit the votes and proceedings of the House of Representatives. Mr Speaker, they can't do that. Not like the way the Leader of the Opposition's office edited, when I say edited, doctored, falsified the transcript of the member for Barton's interview. 1,800 words it was. 1,800 words, and apparently, she said, an unintentional error resulted in 800 words vanishing. That is quite a slip. That really is quite a slip. And, Mr Speaker, it's no mistake that the falsification of that transcript was designed to do one thing and one thing only: cover up the fact that inside the Labor Party there is the deepest opposition to the government's border protection policies, and is designed to obscure the fact that the honourable member and so many of her colleagues want to roll out the welcome mat to the people smugglers and make all of those mistakes that Kevin Rudd made years ago, make them all again. So there'll be more drownings at sea, more unauthorised arrivals and more children in detention. That is what Labor will be seeking to do if they were ever to occupy the benches on this side of the House.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. The member for Menzies.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Foreign Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on recent steps the government has taken to reduce the threat of terrorism in our region, notably following the recent attacks in Indonesia?
The Minister for Foreign Affairs has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Menzies for his question and note his ongoing active interest in foreign affairs, particularly national security. The recent terrorist attacks in Surabaya in Indonesia, where Indonesian families and young children were deployed as suicide bombers, is an horrific reminder to us of the ongoing threat to our communities of violent Islamic extremism. The terrorist attacks targeting Christian churches and police stations were particularly deplorable. About 30 people were killed, over 50 were injured. But what was particularly disturbing is that they were clearly designed to undermine religious tolerance and social cohesion in Indonesia. The Australian government stands in absolute solidarity with the Indonesian government. Both the Prime Minister and I sent messages of support and messages of condolence. The Indonesian government and the Indonesian people are our most important partner when it comes to combating terrorism in our region, and we are working closely with Indonesia, noting, as they have, that Australia has also suffered attempted terrorist attacks, and we're working together to locate foreign terrorist fighters returning from Iraq and Syria. We're seeking to track terrorists and their associates and their equipment and resources. At the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Buenos Aires this week, I met with Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi, and she discussed in detail this manifestation of violent Islamic extremism in the form of using children as suicide bombers. And she discussed ways that we can work more closely together. We can cooperate even further in our fight against terrorism. Indonesia is currently looking at ways of providing more powers to their counter-terrorism authorities, and we are certainly sharing our experiences in that regard. Minister Marsudi thanked the Australian people and the Australian government for our ongoing support and the level of cooperation, including exchanges of intelligence and experience. She noted what Australia had done in our efforts to combat terrorism over a number of years. Australia and Indonesia are both very active members of the Global Counter-Terrorism Forum, and we are jointly chairing a group focusing on countering violent extremism. The Australian government has also recently signed an agreement with the ASEAN leaders during the Prime Minister's hosting of the ASEAN-Australia Leaders Forum in Sydney, and that recommits Australia and the 10 ASEAN nations to the fight against terrorism by coordinating our efforts. Mr Speaker, I know I'm joined with all members in this House as I confirm that the Australian government will dedicate the resources and the energy and the political will to keeping Australians safe as possible, both at home and abroad.
The Leader of the Opposition on indulgence.
I just seek to associate the opposition with the Foreign Minister's remarks. Surabaya is an amazing city. It's Indonesia's second largest city. It's a marvellous cosmopolitan city. It doesn't deserve to have this evil visited upon it, and the opposition stands with the government's remarks of Australia's solidarity with Indonesia.
The member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and his government claim they support lower taxes. So why did the Prime Minister, his ministers and every member of the backbench vote against Labor's plan for lower personal income taxes for 10 million Australians, a tax cut of up to $928 a year last night? That's what they did. How can the Australian people believe anything this Prime Minister says when last night he voted against bigger tax cuts?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, the only tax reform that was voted for last night was the government's reform of personal income tax. Oh yes, it was, and the Labor Party, apparently to their regret, voted for it. But, Mr Speaker, the reality is that the Labor Party is threatening Australians with over $200 billion of new taxes, and most shamefully of all, $5 billion a year raised by raiding the savings of older Australians, raised by raiding the savings of grandparents, self-funded retirees, going after their tax refunds from franking credits, to which they are entitled both in law and in justice. And what they are doing is yet again discriminating against hard-working Australians who have saved for their retirement and want to have the dignity of some independence in their retirement. Labor loathes that, just as they loathe the enterprise of all the hard-working Australian businesses that, encouraged by our tax cuts for small and medium family businesses that are already in operation, are seeing record jobs growth across Australia. Labor is the party of higher taxes, less investment and fewer jobs.
The member for Fisher.
The question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. Will the minister update the House on the importance of having consistent border protection policies, and is the minister aware of any other proposals?
The Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, it's certainly the case that this side of the parliament is very aware, as I think the majority of Australians are aware, that border protection is incredibly important in this day and age. We had an incredible mess to clean up when Labor was in government. They had a situation where they'd inherited 4 people in detention under John Howard's government, no children, and they had 50,000 people arrive on 800 boats and 1,200 people drowned at sea. Now, there is a civil war taking place within the Labor Party at the moment on this very issue because, Mr Speaker, many of them propose to go back to the Rudd and Gillard policies which resulted in those deaths at sea and those kids in detention. Now, Mr Speaker, I saw an interesting tweet from somebody who is well respected by many members opposite, in fact a former leader of the Labor Party. This is the real Mark Latham, and, Mr Speaker, you voted for him. He was your leader. You were climbing the ladder with him. You loved him. You were walking in his footsteps. And, Mr Speaker, what does he say? He says, I quote Mark Latham, Mr Speaker. He says, media reporting that Labor is divided on boat arrivals. In fact, they're remarkably united. 90% of the caucus believes in ending offshore processing. Bill Shorten believes in open borders, humane treatment of refugees, but is only saying otherwise for electoral reasons. Yes. Now, Mr Speaker, if ever you needed evidence of a torn Labor Party, I mean, you could point to many of them, the comments that they've made, but the most remarkable comment I've ever seen come from the Labor Party in relation to this particular matter. Where is it? Where's someone smiling down on the corner here? Because, Mr Speaker, there was a transcript issued, and the transcript issued by the Honourable Linda Burney, Shadow Minister for Human Services, member for Barton. It was nothing like the actual interview, Mr Speaker. It was so bad. I've highlighted the parts where they fabricated the transcript, so the highlighted bits are added in.
Member for
Mr Speaker, they couldn't even doctor it to the point that they represented what David Spears had to say as being accurate. So they doctored Spearsy, and in this transcript it shows, Mr Speaker, that it was the most duplicitous act. It was cleared by the Leader of the Opposition's office. It was conveyed to the press gallery by the Leader of the Opposition's office. Now, nobody would be surprised that this Leader of the Opposition would be part of a dodgy deal, trying to cover up some sort of dodgy circumstance. The Labor Party is hopeless when it comes to stopping the boats.
The member for McMahon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and I refer to his previous answers. Is the Prime Minister aware that last night at 7:18 p.m. the House voted on an amendment which would have given 10 million Australians a tax cut of up to $928, nearly double the government's scheme? Is the Prime Minister further aware that he actually walked into the chamber and voted against that amendment?
The Treasurer has the call.
We're at one. We're as one, as always.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. The Manager of Opposition Business.
On a point of order, the question goes to whether the Prime Minister was completely unaware, giving his previous answers.
Hang on, whoever's interjecting up there, member for Wright, just button it for a second.
No.
I'm trying to
unless the Treasurer has the authority to argue that he was equally unaware and didn't have a clue how he was voting either, only the Prime Minister can answer that question.
And, as the Manager of Opposition Business knows, the practice is very clear. The Prime Minister can refer any question to any minister. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank the Prime Minister for the opportunity to respond in relation to the events of last night and what was voted on in this House. What the Labor Party came in here and sought to do last night was to turn a $143.95 billion tax relief plan into a plan of $74.35 billion in tax relief. Labor came in here and tried to halve the tax relief that we were seeking to do as a government to reward hard-working Australians to work even harder. That's right. And when they failed to do that, they decided to support the government's plan. So the Labor Party last night voted to cut in half tax relief for working Australians in terms of what was put forward in the budget, to take $143.9 billion down to $74.35 billion. Mr. Speaker, the Labor Party are so addicted to tax that they now have $290 billion in higher taxes, aspiration-sucking taxes, job-destroying taxes, economy-weakening taxes, and I'm not surprised that the Shadow Minister, Snowflake over there, the Shadow Minister, Shadow Treasurer, has walked away from his commitment, his solemn pledge, that taxes as a share of the economy should not rise above 23.7%. He's walked away from that, Mr. Speaker, because he has no hope, not a snowflake's chance in hell, Mr. Speaker, for old Snowflake over there, to be able to deliver on that pledge, because we know at the last election he took taxes as a share of the economy on their projections to 25.7%. And since then he's only taxed higher. You know what it says about a Shadow Treasurer who's not prepared to control taxes? It means they're not prepared to control spending. This Shadow Treasurer has not the stomach for control of spending, not just the stomach to control the spending of all the big spenders that line that side of the opposition front bench. He doesn't have the mettle to stand up to his Leader of the Opposition or the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. If he sat around the ERC table, he would be the biggest pushover to ever sit in that chair. And so his only answer is this: I can't stop my colleagues spending in the Labor Party, so I'll just have to help them raise taxes.
Just before I call the member for Tangney, I remind the Treasurer on referring to members by their correct titles. I wasn't sure who he was referring to, but he just should refer to members by their correct titles, and then he'll be in order. The member for Tangney.
My question is to the Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Jobs and Innovation. Will the minister update the House on steps the government has taken to support jobs and growth in our economy? Is the minister aware of any different courses of action?
The Minister for Defence Industry, representing the Minister for Jobs and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for Tangney for his question, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Turnbull-McCormack government has created 1 million new jobs in the last 4.5 years, 5 years ahead of the promise we made in the 2013 election, Mr. Speaker. It's great news for the 1 million Australians who've gained jobs because of the policies of this government. They've benefited from our pro-growth agenda, our jobs and growth policies, Mr. Speaker, which are less tax, a commitment to free trade, a support for industry like defence industry, infrastructure, agriculture, investment in education and the skills of our people, Mr. Speaker, of course less red tape, which we've been delivering for the last 4.5 years. But, Mr. Speaker, all this could be put at risk with the election of a Labor CFMEU government at the next federal election, Mr. Speaker. The Australian people have a right to know what the secret agreement is that the Leader of the Opposition struck with John Setka from the CFMEU in 2013 in order to defeat the People's Choice for Leader of the Labor Party back in 2013, Mr. Speaker. It's nice to see the People's Choice getting a run at the dispatch box. We thought he was the man in the iron mask there for a while, Mr. Speaker, but it's nice to see him at the dispatch box every now and then. The Australian people have a right to know what the terms of this secret agreement contain, Mr. Speaker. It's very, very important. This weekend at the ALP Victorian Conference, Leader of the Opposition has the opportunity to reveal the terms of the secret agreement. He also has the opportunity, if he chooses to take it, to reject the CFMEU's motion about unfettered right of striking, Mr. Speaker. The CFMEU is sponsoring a motion to have an unfettered right to strike. Leader of the Opposition could speak against it, Mr. Speaker, if he chose to do so. He could disappoint one of his front benchers, Mr. Speaker, who said to the newspaper, the Leader of the Opposition has one response to a CFMEU request. It's yes. That's what his own side says about his relationship with the CFMEU, Mr. Speaker. And he could also, Mr. Speaker, speak against John Setka's motion to tithe the ALP staffers' salaries, Mr. Speaker. In the supporting documentation for tithing ALP staffers, John Setka writes, "Conference notes with concern that there are currently ministerial offers that harbour advisers with deeply anti-union sentiments, Mr Speaker. It's kind of like a line out of a Trotsky speech, isn't it? You've got officers over there literally harbouring advisers who might not be pro-union, Mr Speaker, and that is another one of the resolutions from the CFMEU. So this weekend he can reject the motions from the CFMEU, he can reveal his secret agreement, he can reject the CFMEU's donations, and he can throw the CFMEU
Minister's time
out of the
has
ALP.
concluded. The member for Batman.
My question's to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that last night every member of this government, including the member for Corangamite, voted against Labor's personal income tax plan that will give 66,000 people in Corangamite a tax cut of up to $928 a year, almost double the tax cut they'll get from the government? Why didn't this Prime Minister vote for lower taxes for 10 million Australians instead of giving an $80 billion handout to big business?
Member for Batman will resume her seat. The member for Corangamite is warned. The member for Bowman is warned. I'm going to ask the member for Batman to repeat the question without interjection, and interjections will be dealt with severely. I could not hear the second part of that question at all, and I remind members of the House it's the member for Batman's first question. The member for Batman.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that last night every member of this government, including the member for Corangamite, voted against Labor's personal income tax plan that would give 66,000 people in Corangamite a tax cut of up to $928 a year, almost double the tax cut they'll get from the government? Why didn't this Prime Minister vote for lower taxes for 10 million Australians instead of giving an $80 billion handout to big business?
That's a good question.
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I can confirm, as the honourable member is well aware, that not only all members of the government but all members of the opposition voted for the government's tax plan. They did. They all voted for it. You're all over here. They're all in favour. All in favour last night and now filled with regret. Well, Mr Speaker, we voted with support from the Labor Party for a huge reform of personal income tax worth $140 billion over the medium term. And Labor attempted to amend, we recall that very well, as part of their effort to impose $200 billion of additional taxes on Australians, because posing as caring for Australians, the Labor Party wants to go after one Australian business after another, wants to put up personal income tax, and most shamefully of all, wants to go after, to the tune of $5 billion a year, the savings of hard-working retired Australians. And the honourable member referred to the member for Corangamite and her constituents. And in Corangamite, Mr Speaker, there are thousands of businesses that are getting on and getting ahead because of the incentive the government has given them. And the member for Corangamite knows very well that the future of her community depends on a stronger economy and a government that backs that enterprise, and she knows that that is what is driving the record jobs growth in Australia. But the member for Batman, on the other hand, I don't think, when she was recently campaigning, went around and told some of the retirees in her seat how much of their savings they were going to raise, because she and her colleagues are coming after those savings. Oh yes, they are. All of those hard-working people in Batman that have worked hard and saved and invested, the Labor Party is going to cut their income by 20%, 30%, a massive cut out of the income of Australians that are too old to go and get another job or start a business, going after the most vulnerable, and for the same reason they denied the ineligibility of their dual citizen members. For the same reason they doctored the transcript of the member for Barton, because they thought they could get away with it. the Leader of the Opposition will try anything on, any duplicity, because he thinks he can get away with it, and the Australian people are too smart for him, and they're too smart for Labor.
Prime Minister, over the raucous interjections, I didn't hear a certain remark he said. Did the Prime Minister make an unparliamentary remark? We'll move on. We'll move on. Members, the Minister for Home Affairs. The member for Flynn has the call.
My question is to the Minister of Environment and Energy, representing the Minister for Education and Training. Is the Minister aware of reports that the National Tertiary Education Union is seeking to restrict the study of our history and that of Western civilisation? How is this consistent with principles of academic freedom at our universities?
Members on my left, the Minister for the Environment and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Flynn for his question. Paul Ramsay was a health pioneer and one of Australia's most successful businessmen, and he cared deeply about our history. He cared deeply about our culture. He cared deeply about our society. And like many on this side of the House, he was concerned that Australian universities were no longer teaching the basics of Western civilisation, Mr Speaker. And as the member for Warringah has reminded us, Paul, to take a leaf out of Monty Python, would often say, "What has Western civilisation done for us, Mr Speaker? How about democracy? How about freedom of speech? How about freedom of religion? How about a rule of law? How about intellectual and artistic curiosity? And how about market capitalism, Mr Speaker? Not just the aqueducts, everything else, Mr Speaker." Now, Mr Speaker, so you would think when the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilisation was offering our universities scholarships and the opportunity to support courses in Western civilisation, they'd be supported. But no. The National Tertiary Education Union calls Western civilisation courses narrow, radical, promulgating the alleged superiority of Western culture and civilisation. The National University Student Association calls it a rhetorical tool to continue the racist prioritisation of Western history and other cultures. Mr Speaker, how can it be racist to teach about the rule of law? How can it be racist to teach about freedom of speech? How can it be racist to teach about democracy, Mr Speaker? How can it be radical to promote academic freedom, Mr Speaker? I tell you what is radical. It was the member for Melbourne's PhD thesis at one of our universities. It was titled "Work to Rule, Rethinking Marx," Mr Speaker. Work to Rule, Rethinking Marx. Now, Mr Speaker, obviously Marx was too conservative, Mr Speaker. Now, it is hoped that those on that side of the House will get behind the Centre for Western Civilisation, a bit like Kim Beazley, who's a board member on the Ramsay Centre for Western Civilisation. And it's time that both sides of this House, Liberal, National and Labor, got behind the Centre for Western Civilisation, condemned the unions and reminded the Australian people everything that Western civilisation has done for our humanity and for our society.
The member for Herbert.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that last night every member of the government, including the member for Capricornia, voted against Labor's personal income tax plan that would give 60,000 people in Capricornia a tax cut of up to $928 a year, almost double the tax cut they'll get from the government? Why didn't this Prime Minister vote for lower taxes for 10 million Australians instead of giving $80 billion tax cut to big business?
Prime Minister has the call.
Speaker, I'm sure the honourable member has advised all the businesses in her electorate that she, if she's part of a Labor government, will be putting up taxes on them. In Townsville, there are plenty of businesses there that need every incentive, and I wonder whether the honourable member has told some of the self-funded retirees in Townsville that she's going to come after their income as well. Oh, she said she has. She says she has. Well, it'll be very interesting. Very interesting. I'm sure the Bulletin will be investigating that to see how many people she's actually door-knocked and said, hello, hello, what's she saying? I'm here with Bill Shorten. We're here to raid your savings.
The Prime Minister will refer to members by their correct titles.
Come in for a cup of tea. We've been waiting for this joyful moment. Mr Speaker, the Labor Party is not— the member for McMahon said they will have policies in this space and not in this space. This approach to politics is in a parallel universe. Australians know their savings, their businesses, their jobs are threatened by the honourable member and her colleagues in the Labor Party.
The member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Social Services. Will the minister update the House on measures the government has taken to assist people to move from welfare into work, particularly in my electorate of O'Connor?
The member for Social Services.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Very good, Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I'd like to thank the member for his question. As the member knows, the Coalition believes that the best form of welfare is a job. It is why we have put in place policies that have delivered over 1,100 jobs a day, and we have seen 140,000 people move off welfare. I was with the member for O'Connor and his electorate last week to see how the cashless debit card was being implemented in his electorate. The card is being rolled out in the goldfields of Western Australia, and the member and all his local councils support that rollout because they know it is a very worthwhile trial. As we heard when we met with mayors, council CEOs, Indigenous and community leaders, they want this card because they want to try something new. Western Australian police data has indicated the domestic and non-domestic assault rate in the goldfields is more than twice the state average. Alcohol-related hospitalisations and deaths were 25% higher than the Western Australia state average in 2007-11. Shire of Laverton President Mr Patrick Hill told the committee, "We are at wit's end. We want to see a safe community. We don't want to see this abuse." Now that the card has begun to be rolled out, community leaders who supported the card are already beginning to see the beneficial impact. The departmental shopfronts have provided more than 1,000 face-to-face customer interactions. More than 2,600 cards have been issued, and 80% of people have self-activated their cards over the phone or online. The community told us stories of people starting to put food in their cupboard, starting to feed their children, starting to take care of themselves. I was told how the checkouts were seeing less alcohol and more food and essentials being bought. They commented that they had seen families buy groceries that they had never seen in the store before. I'd like to commend the member for O'Connor for his passion in making sure that this card was trialled in his electorate. The outcomes already are very worthwhile, and he is to be absolutely commended for what he has done. And can I say that given these stories and what we've seen in Ceduna, East Kimberley as well, I would ask all members of this House to back legislation which will try and expand the trial to Hinkler next week. This is incredibly important work which can change lives, and we should all support it.
The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister aware that the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions advised Senate estimates that the Serious Financial Crime Task Force is being abolished?
Is the Prime Minister seriously abolishing the Serious Financial Crime Task Force right in the middle of the Royal Commission into the banks?
The Minister for Revenue and Financial Services.
I thank the Speaker for the question, and I'd like to point out I thank you, Mr Speaker, for the call, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. And I'd like to point out that it is simply not correct what he has stated. The government is aware that the funding of the task force runs to the 30th of June 2019, which is more than a year into the future. Now, responsible governments address funding of programs in the context of budget preparations. So you would anticipate that we would look at the funding in the next budget preparation. And can I point out, when it comes to the Serious Financial Crimes Task Force, it didn't exist under the Labor government. It was established under the coalition government. It was established and funded under our government. And let me tell you, it has achieved some very, very good outcomes. It was established to investigate and track down serious financial crime and to prosecute those people who break the law. And as at February of 2018, since the establishment of this task force, we have seen it complete 740 audits and reviews. It has raised tax liabilities of more than $500 million. It has collected more than $200 million in cash, and it has resulted in 4 people who have received custodial sentences. There are currently 29 criminal, civil and intelligence operations in progress under the Serious Financial Crimes Task Force that we have established, and I know that those opposite like to fabricate, they like to doctor the facts, but they cannot doctor this. It is funded, it will continue to be funded in the normal course of
the member for Fenner and the member for Kingston. The member for Moore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Will the Minister update the House on the importance of celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January, and is the Minister aware of any dissimilar suggestions?
The Minister for Citizenship has the call.
We're going to thank the member for Moore for his question, and I'm disappointed to inform the House that at their formal conference this weekend in Melbourne, the Labor Party will be voting to abolish Australia Day. And this motion of urgency is not being moved by some rank-and-file member of the Labor Party, but rather it's being moved by a staff member which works for the shortened team. And this conference, Mr Speaker, is also not just any old conference around Australia, but it is a conference which the Leader of the Opposition belongs to. It is his party, it is his city, it is his state, it is the division which elected him. And it will be a test for the Leader of the Opposition this weekend, because the Leader of the Opposition will be speaking at this conference, and it is now a test for him to shut down this debate and back mainstream Australia, who wants to keep Australia Day on the 26th of January. But we know that he's not going to live up to this test, Mr Speaker, because this is a weak Leader of the Opposition. We know he gets pushed around by John Setka and the CFMEU, and now he gets pushed around by the extreme elements, the extreme left of his party, who want to abolish Australia Day. Mr Speaker, it seems that ever since the Greens kicked off this campaign to abolish Australia Day at the beginning of this year, the Labor Party has been snapping at their heels trying to keep up. But they're not going to keep up with the Greens, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we firmly believe in Australia Day, and we firmly believe in it being held on January 26. It is a day which unites Australia around everything which is great about this country. It is a day when we celebrate our freedoms, we celebrate our prosperity. It is a day when we acknowledge the Indigenous heritage, we acknowledge the British foundations, and we celebrate our multicultural character.
It's also a day that is the most important and popular day for new migrants to become citizens of this great nation. And just this year, over 12,000 people became citizens on Australia Day from 140 different countries. This is a day which is important for mainstream Australia. We celebrate it, we enjoy it, we are proud of it, we fly the Australian flag and we rejoice in our freedoms. And it is time for the Leader of the Opposition to back this important day. This is a test for him this weekend at the state conference which he belongs to. Stand up against the extreme left in your party. Stand up against the Green. Back mainstream Australia and back Australia Day.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
If I can just have members' attention for